Grief has a way of stripping away all pretense, revealing the raw truth beneath years of polite family dynamics. It's like standing naked in a hurricane while everyone else has an umbrella, watching them decide whether you're worth sharing shelter with. That's what I learned at my mother's funeral when my own daughter looked me in the eye and declared that her stepmother was now the real grandmother to my grandchildren. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Hayes, and I'm 52 years old. 3 weeks ago, I buried my mother, Helen, after a 2-year battle with Alzheimer's that drained not just her memory, but every ounce of emotional strength I had left. For 24 months, I had been her primary caregiver, her advocate, her voice when she could no longer speak for herself. I quit my job as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm in Denver to move back to my childhood home in Boulder, Colorado, sleeping in my old bedroom while monitoring her medications, managing her doctor's appointments, and watching the woman who raised me disappear piece by piece. My ex-husband Marcus had remarried 5 years earlier to Sophia, a woman 15 years younger than me with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a successful career in real estate. They lived in an expansive house in Cherry Hills Village with their 2 young sons, ages 8 and 6. Meanwhile, I had spent the last decade rebuilding my life after our messy divorce, working long hours to maintain my modest townhouse and support myself independently. The settlement hadn't been generous. Marcus had better lawyers, and I had been too emotionally exhausted to fight harder for what I deserved. Our daughter, Emma, was 31, a pediatric nurse living in Fort Collins with her husband, David, and my 2 precious grandchildren, Lily, who was 9, and Connor, who was 7. Emma had always been closer to her father, drawn to his easy charm and the stability that Sophia brought to their household. While I struggled as a single mother working full-time, Marcus and Sophia could offer Emma babysitting, family vacations, and a picture-perfect home where Sunday dinners happened around a mahogany table set with actual china. During Mom's illness, Emma visited maybe 6 times total. Each visit lasted less than 2 hours, usually ending with her making excuses about getting back to the kids or David needing help with something at home. She would stand awkwardly in the living room while I explained Mom's current condition, nodding sympathetically while checking her phone for messages. Meanwhile, Sophia had never met my mother, not once in 5 years of marriage to Marcus, yet somehow she had become the family matriarch in Emma's eyes. The funeral arrangements had been my responsibility entirely. I chose the flowers, wrote the obituary, selected the readings, and coordinated with the funeral director. Emma contributed by showing up 20 minutes before the service started, looking polished in a black dress I had never seen before. Her children dressed in matching outfits that screamed expensive department store. Marcus arrived separately with Sophia, who wore a tasteful black suit and pearl earrings, her arm linked through his as if she belonged there. The service itself was beautiful, exactly what Mom would have wanted. The pastor spoke about her decades of teaching 3rd grade, her volunteer work at the animal shelter, and her devotion to her family. I had prepared a eulogy that took me weeks to write, sharing memories of her homemade Halloween costumes, her patient help with homework, and the way she sang while cooking Sunday breakfast. My voice cracked as I described her final days, when she would sometimes recognize me and whisper my name with such love that it broke my heart all over again. After the service, we gathered at the cemetery for the burial. The November wind cut through our coats as we stood around the casket, and I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. This was my mother, the woman who had shaped me, supported me, loved me unconditionally, and I was saying goodbye surrounded by people who had barely been present during her final years. The funeral director handed me the flag that had covered the casket. Mom had been married to my father, who served in Vietnam before his death when I was 16, and I clutched it against my chest like a lifeline. As people began to disperse, Emma approached me with Lily and Connor in tow. The children had been unusually quiet during the service, sensing the gravity of the occasion even if they didn't fully understand it. I knelt down to hug them, these precious grandchildren who barely knew their great-grandmother, but who represented the future of our family legacy. I was already thinking about how to keep Mom's memory alive for them, planning to create photo albums and share stories about the woman who had loved them from the moment they were born. That's when Emma said the words that would haunt me for months to come. "Kids, I want you to know that even though great-grandma Helen is gone, you still have Grandma Sophia. She's going to be your real grandmother now, the one who will be there for all your important moments." She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom, I think it's better this way. Sophia has more time to devote to them, and she's better at the grandmother role anyway. You've been so focused on taking care of Grandma Helen that you've missed out on really bonding with Lily and Connor." The cemetery suddenly felt like it was spinning around me. I stood there holding my mother's flag, dirt still fresh on her grave, listening to my daughter transfer my role as grandmother to another woman. The children looked confused, glancing between Emma and me as if waiting for clarification. Lily, who had always called me Grandma Becky, reached for my hand uncertainly. Connor, who was younger and more easily influenced, nodded solemnly as if this arrangement made perfect sense to his 7-year-old mind. Marcus stepped forward, placing what I'm sure he thought was a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Rebecca, Emma's just trying to think about what's best for the kids. Sophia has been wonderful with them, and she has more flexibility in her schedule. You've been through so much with your mom's illness. Maybe it's time to focus on yourself. For a while." His tone was reasonable, practical, as if we were discussing a work schedule rather than my relationship with my grandchildren. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sophia remained silent, but I caught the satisfied gleam in her eyes. This was what she had been working toward for 5 years, the complete replacement of me in my own family structure. She had positioned herself as the better option, the more available grandmother, the one with resources and energy while I had been consumed with caring for my dying mother. It was a masterful manipulation, executed with surgical precision while I was too grief-stricken and exhausted to defend myself. I looked around at the faces of people who had claimed to love me, searching for someone who would speak up on my behalf, who would recognize the cruelty of what was happening. But the few relatives and family friends who had attended the funeral were already walking toward their cars, eager to escape the cold and return to their normal lives. The moment felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's nightmare unfold. Emma kissed my cheek with the same perfunctory affection she might show a distant relative. "We'll call you soon, Mom. Maybe we can have lunch sometime when things settle down." She took the children's hands and walked toward Marcus's luxury SUV, where Sophia was already waiting in the passenger seat. Lily looked back at me once, her small face troubled, but Emma guided her forward without allowing her to say goodbye properly. As I stood alone beside my mother's grave, watching my daughter drive away with my grandchildren toward their new life that didn't include me, something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't just about grandmother roles or scheduling convenience. This was about power, about who got to define family relationships, about who mattered and who was disposable. For months, I had been so focused on being the dutiful daughter, the selfless caregiver, the understanding mother, that I had failed to protect my own position in the family hierarchy. The drive home to my empty house was surreal. I walked through rooms that still smelled like the medical equipment we had rented for Mom's final weeks, past the hospital bed that would be picked up tomorrow, through the kitchen where I had prepared countless meals for someone who often forgot to eat them. The silence was deafening after months of monitoring breathing patterns and medication schedules. For the first time in 2 years, I had no caregiving responsibilities, no one depending on me, no purpose that felt meaningful. I sat at Mom's kitchen table, the same one where she had helped me with homework 40 years earlier, and tried to process what had just happened. Emma hadn't consulted me about this grandmother transition. She had announced it as a fait accompli, a decision made without my input or consent. The casual cruelty of the timing, doing this at Mom's graveside while I was still clutching her burial flag, revealed a level of thoughtlessness that shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow still did. Over the following days, as I began the grim task of sorting through Mom's belongings and settling her affairs, I had plenty of time to think about the family dynamics that had led to this moment. Emma had been drifting away from me for years, but I had attributed it to the natural evolution of adult children establishing their independence. I hadn't recognized it as a calculated replacement, a gradual substitution of Sophia's influence for mine in every area that mattered. The signs had been there if I had been paying attention. Emma rarely called me for parenting advice anymore, but I had overheard her on the phone with Sophia discussing everything from Lily's school troubles to Connor's soccer schedule. When the kids had school performances or sports events, Emma would post photos on social media featuring Marcus and Sophia as the proud grandparents, while I learned about these milestone moments after the fact. Holiday gatherings happened at Marcus and Sophia's house, with me receiving a polite invitation that felt more obligatory than welcoming. During Mom's illness, I had convinced myself that my absence from family events was temporary, that everyone understood I had more pressing priorities. I thought Emma respected my sacrifice, my devotion to caring for her grandmother during such a difficult time. Instead, it seemed my absence had simply made it easier for Sophia to slide into the role I had vacated, establishing herself as the primary grandparent while I was distracted by medical appointments and insurance paperwork. The more I reflected on the situation, the angrier I became. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns out quickly, but a cold, calculating fury that settled into my bones and began to plan. I had spent decades being the accommodating one, the peacemaker, the woman who absorbed everyone else's convenience at the expense of her own needs. I had agreed to an unfavorable divorce settlement to avoid prolonged conflict. I had stepped back from family events to avoid tension with Sophia. I had sacrificed my career and financial security to care for Mom without asking anyone else in, the family to share that burden. And this was my reward. This was how my sacrifice and devotion were being repaid. By being erased from my own family story, replaced by a woman who had contributed nothing to the hard work of loving and caring, but who had the luxury of being the fun, available alternative. As I packed Mom's photographs into boxes, I came across albums spanning decades of family history. Pictures of Emma as a baby, toddler photos where I looked exhausted but happy, school events where I was the parent in attendance while Marcus worked late, evidence of years of active, engaged motherhood that had somehow been rewritten in Emma's memory as insufficient compared to Sophia's recent contributions. The revisionist history was breathtaking in its audacity. That night, I made myself a cup of tea using one of Mom's favorite mugs and sat down at her computer to begin researching. If Emma thought she could simply erase me from my grandchildren's lives, she was about to learn that I had more fight left in me than anyone realized. I had been the invisible woman for too long, the one who quietly handled responsibilities while others claimed credit and recognition. It was time to remind everyone exactly what I had contributed to this family and what they stood to lose by discarding me so carelessly. I started with Emma's social media accounts, which she had never bothered to make private. Years of posts revealed a pattern of deliberate exclusion that I had been too trusting to notice. Photos of family gatherings I hadn't been invited to, celebrations where Sophia occupied the place of honor that should have been mine, grandchildren's achievements celebrated with their real grandparents while I learned about them secondhand. The documentation of my erasure was extensive and meticulously preserved in digital form. But social media was just the beginning. I had access to information that Emma had forgotten I possessed, details about her life and choices that she preferred to keep private. As her mother, I had been her confidant during her college years, her financial supporter during her early marriage, her emergency contact for everything from medical forms to mortgage applications. I knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking, and it was time to decide whether that knowledge would remain buried with my silence. The house felt different as I moved through it that night, no longer like a shrine to caregiving and loss, but like a war room where strategy was being planned. Mom's desk became my headquarters as I organized documents, printed screenshots, and began compiling evidence of exactly who had been present for the hard work of family life versus who had simply shown up for the photo opportunities. The truth was a powerful weapon, and I was finally ready to wield it. By dawn, I had a clear picture of what needed to happen next. Emma thought she could rewrite history, eliminate me from my grandchildren's future, and face no consequences for that betrayal. She was wrong, dead wrong. And she was about to discover that the quiet, accommodating mother she had taken for granted was capable of fighting back with a precision and determination that would surprise everyone, including myself. The first call came at 7 a.m, 3 days after I had begun my investigation. Emma's voice was tight with barely controlled panic, a tone I hadn't heard from her since she was 16 and had crashed my car into a mailbox while sneaking out to meet friends. "Mom, we need to talk. Right now." No greeting, no pleasantries, just the demand of someone who had discovered that their carefully constructed world was about to collapse. I had been expecting this call, had even prepared my response while sipping coffee from Mom's favorite mug, the one with faded roses that she had used every morning for 20 years. "Good morning to you too, Emma. I was just thinking about you." My voice was calm, measured, the tone of someone who had found their center after years of being knocked off balance by other people's demands and expectations. "Don't play games with me. I know what you've been doing. The school called yesterday asking questions about my volunteer background check application from 2 years ago. Questions about information that only you would know. And David's firm received an anonymous tip about some financial irregularities that need investigating. This isn't a coincidence." I smiled, taking another sip of coffee. The background check issue had been a stroke of genius, really. Emma had lied on her application to volunteer at Lily's school, claiming volunteer experience at organizations where she had never actually worked. She had needed the volunteer hours to qualify for a program that would look good on her nursing resume, and had counted on no one actually verifying her claims. Unfortunately for her, I had kept meticulous records of her actual activities during those years, including the period when she claimed to be volunteering at a homeless shelter while she was actually taking a pottery class in Aspen. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Emma. I've been busy sorting through your grandmother's belongings, trying to decide what to keep and what to donate. It's amazing what you discover when you really start looking through someone's life." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for me to wonder if she had hung up. Then she spoke again, her voice even tighter than before. "What do you want, Mom? What's this really about?" "This is about truth, Emma. Something our family seems to have lost sight of recently. Your grandmother spent her final years wondering why her granddaughter rarely visited, why the great-grandchildren she adored barely knew her name. She died thinking she had somehow failed as a mother and grandmother, that she wasn't worthy of love or attention. That breaks my heart in ways you can't possibly understand. That's not fair. You know I was busy with work and the kids, and David's been under tremendous pressure at the firm. We visited when we could." "You visited 6 times in 2 years, Emma. 6 times. I have the calendar I kept, marking every visit, every phone call, every attempt to include you in her care. Meanwhile, you were posting pictures on Instagram of family barbecues at Marcus and Sophia's house, showing the kids having wonderful times with their real grandparents. Do you have any idea how that made her feel? How it made me feel?" Another long silence. When Emma spoke again, her voice had changed, become more calculated. "Look, I'm sorry if Grandma's feelings were hurt. I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt. But that doesn't give you the right to sabotage my life, my marriage, my career. David could lose his job over this investigation, and I could lose my volunteer position at the school. That affects Lily and Connor, too. Does it? Or does it just affect the image you've carefully constructed of yourself as the perfect mother, the devoted wife, the community volunteer? Images have a way of crumbling when they're built on lies, Emma. I should know. I've been watching my image as a valued family member crumble for years. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line, the sound of someone trying to maintain control while their world shifted beneath their feet. This was the Emma I remembered from her teenage years, the one who would lie with breathtaking audacity and then become furious when caught, as if the very act of discovery was a personal betrayal. You're being vindictive and petty, Mom. This isn't who you are. You're right. This isn't who I was. I was the woman who accepted whatever scraps of attention you threw my way. I was the woman who made excuses for your absence, who covered for your lies, who put your needs ahead of my own dignity. That woman died at your grandmother's funeral, Emma. She died when you looked me in the eye and told my grandchildren that another woman would be their real grandmother now. The phone went quiet again, and I could almost see Emma's mind racing, trying to find a way to regain control of the conversation, to turn this back into a situation where I was the unreasonable one and she was the victim. It was a dance we had performed countless times over the years, with me eventually backing down to preserve peace. Not this time. I didn't mean it like that, she said finally, her voice smaller now. I was just trying to help the kids adjust, to make sure they felt secure with their family structure. Sophia has been good to them, and you've been so busy with Grandma that you haven't had time to build the same kind of relationship. Whose fault was that, Emma? When I was spending 18 hours a day managing your grandmother's care, who was supposed to be building relationships with the children? When I was sleeping in a chair next to her hospital bed, who was posting pictures of family game nights and birthday parties that I wasn't invited to? We didn't want to burden you with social obligations when you were dealing with so much. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired its audacity. This was the revisionist history Emma had been perfecting for months, the narrative that painted my exclusion as a kindness rather than a calculated replacement. She had probably convinced herself it was true, had repeated it enough times that she believed her own fiction. Emma, I have screenshots of group chat messages between you, Marcus, and Sophia discussing family events. Messages where you specifically decided not to invite me because, and I quote, "Mom always makes everything about Grandma Helen's condition, and it brings down the mood. You didn't exclude me to protect me. You excluded me because my grief and stress were inconvenient for your perfect family gatherings." The sharp intake of breath on the other end told me I had hit the target. The group chat had been a goldmine of information, revealing not just the deliberate exclusion, but the casual cruelty with which my emotional state had been dismissed. Messages about how I had let myself go during Mom's illness, how I was obsessed with caregiving to an unhealthy degree, how Sophia was so much more fun to be around because she wasn't constantly worried about medical appointments and insurance. Claims. How did you get those messages? Emma's voice was barely above a whisper now. I'm your mother, Emma. I've been your emergency contact for 15 years. I have access to your accounts for situations where you might need help. You forgot to change those permissions after you decided I was no longer a relevant part of your life. This was only partially true. The emergency contact access had expired years ago, but Emma didn't need to know that. What she didn't realize was that her social media privacy settings had never been properly configured, and her husband David had been posting screenshots of family group chats to his own social media accounts, thinking they were private when they were actually visible to anyone who knew where to look. You violated my privacy. You had no right to read those messages. I had every right to understand why my daughter decided to replace me with her stepmother. I had every right to know why my grandchildren were being taught that I was no longer their real grandmother. And I have every right to share what I've learned with people who might be interested in the truth about your character. You're threatening me. I'm educating you. There's a difference. For years, you've operated under the assumption that I would always be there to clean up your messes, to cover for your lies, to absorb whatever cruelty you decided to dish out. You've assumed that because I love you, I would never hold you accountable for hurting me. That assumption was wrong. Emma was crying now, the kind of manipulative tears she had learned to deploy as a teenager when she wanted to avoid consequences for her actions. Once, those tears would have worked on me, would have triggered my maternal instincts to comfort and protect. Now they just sounded like the tantrum of a child who had finally encountered a boundary she couldn't cross. What do you want me to do, Mom? What will make this stop? I want you to understand what you've done. I want you to sit with the knowledge that you hurt your mother at the worst moment of her life, that you used her grief and exhaustion as an opportunity to replace her with someone more convenient. I want you to explain to Lily and Connor why their grandmother suddenly doesn't matter anymore, why the woman who held them as babies and changed their diapers and read them bedtime stories is now disposable. That's not what happened. Then explain to me what did happen, Emma. Explain how standing at your grandmother's grave and announcing that Sophia is now the real grandmother was anything other than a deliberate attempt to erase me from my grandchildren's lives. The silence stretched so long that I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, more honest than it had been in years. I was angry, Mom. I was angry that you weren't there for us during the hardest time of our lives. David was working 80-hour weeks trying to make partner. I was dealing with Lily's learning difficulties and Connor's behavioral issues, and you were completely unavailable. Every time I called, you were at the hospital or dealing with Grandma's doctors or managing her medications. I needed my mother, and you chose her over me. The admission hung in the air between us, raw and honest in a way that cut deeper than any of her previous lies. This was the heart of it, the real reason behind her betrayal. She had needed me, and I had been caring for my dying mother instead of being available to solve her problems. In her mind, that made me the one who had abandoned the family first. Emma, your grandmother was dying. She had Alzheimer's disease. She needed constant care, constant advocacy, constant vigilance to make sure she received proper treatment. I didn't choose her over you. I chose to fulfill my responsibility as her daughter during the most vulnerable time of her life. But what about your responsibility as my mother? What about your responsibility to your grandchildren? My responsibility was to model what it means to honor your parents, to show love and devotion even when it's difficult and inconvenient. I was teaching you and the children what family loyalty looks like, what it means to sacrifice for the people you love. Apparently, that lesson didn't take. We're not mind readers, Mom. If you needed help, if you wanted us to be more involved, you should have asked. I did ask. I asked you to visit more often. I asked you to call her once a week. I asked you to bring the children to see her before she forgot who they were. You were always too busy, always had other priorities, always had somewhere else to be. So I stopped asking and started handling everything myself. That's not fair. You made it clear that you had everything under control, that you didn't need our help. I made it clear that I wasn't going to beg for basic human decency from my own daughter. There's a difference. The conversation was spiraling into territory we had never explored before, the deep wounds and resentments that had been festering for years beneath the surface of our polite family interactions. Part of me wanted to end the call, to retreat, into the comfortable fiction that we were just going through a rough patch that would eventually resolve itself. But the stronger part of me, the part that had been awakened by Emma's betrayal at the funeral, knew that this reckoning was long overdue. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there more during Grandma's illness. I'm sorry I didn't call enough or visit enough or help enough. But destroying my life isn't going to bring her back. It's not going to change what happened. You're right. Nothing will bring her back. But holding you accountable for your choices might prevent you from making the same mistakes with your own children. It might teach you that actions have consequences, that the people who love you aren't required to absorb unlimited amounts of cruelty and neglect. So what happens now? Do I lose my volunteer position? Does David lose his job? Do we lose our house? Our stability? Everything we've worked for? That depends entirely on you, Emma. It depends on whether you're willing to acknowledge what you've done and make amends, or whether you're going to continue pretending that you're the victim in this situation. What kind of amends? What do you want from me? For the first time since the conversation began, I smiled. This was the question I had been waiting for, the moment when Emma would finally understand that I was no longer the pushover mother she had taken for granted. The terms I was about to lay out would test her character in ways she had never been tested before. I want you to tell Lily and Connor the truth about their great-grandmother. I want you to show them pictures of her, tell them stories about her life, help them understand who she was and what she meant to our family. I want you to take them to her grave once a month and teach them to honor her memory. That's reasonable. I can do that. I'm not finished. I want you to apologize to me in front of Marcus and Sophia for what you said at the funeral. I want you to acknowledge that your attempt to replace me as the children's grandmother was cruel and unacceptable. And I want you to make it clear to everyone in the family that I am and will always be Lily and Connor's grandmother, regardless of what relationship they have with Sophia. Emma was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost hear her calculating the social cost of such public admissions. The family dynamic had been built on the fiction that Sophia was the superior grandmother, that my displacement was natural and beneficial. Acknowledging the cruelty of that fiction would require her to admit that she had been wrong, that she had hurt me deliberately, that she had prioritized convenience over loyalty. And if I don't agree to these terms, then you'll discover that the information I've gathered about your volunteer application and David's financial practices is just the beginning. I have access to 15 years of your personal history, Emma. Every lie you've told, every corner you've cut, every time you've claimed credit for someone else's work. I've been your mother for 31 years, and I know where all the bodies are buried. The threat hung in the air between us, cold and final. I had crossed a line I never thought I would cross, had become the kind of mother who would use her knowledge as a weapon against her own child. The realization should have horrified me, should have sent me running back to my old patterns of accommodation and forgiveness. Instead, it felt like putting on armor I should have worn years ago. You're really going to do this? You're going to destroy your own daughter's life over a stupid comment at a funeral? I'm going to teach my daughter that her actions have consequences, something I apparently failed to do when she was younger. I'm going to show her that the people who love her deserve to be treated with basic respect and dignity. And I'm going to make sure that my grandchildren grow up understanding what real family loyalty looks like. Emma ended the call without saying goodbye, leaving me alone in Mom's kitchen with the morning light streaming through windows she would never see again. I finished my coffee and began planning the next phase of my campaign, feeling more alive and purposeful than I had in years. The war for my family's respect had begun, and I intended to win it. The second phase of my awakening began with a knock on my door at 8 o'clock that evening. Through the peephole, I could see Marcus standing on my front porch, his expensive suit slightly wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. He held a bottle of wine in one hand and wore the expression of a man who believed he could charm his way out of any situation. 20 years of marriage had taught me to recognize that, look, the one that said he was about to try to manage me back into compliance. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Hello, Marcus. This is unexpected. Rebecca, we need to talk. Emma called me, very upset. She says you've been making threats, interfering with her life. This isn't like you. He held up the wine bottle, a vintage I recognized from our anniversary dinners years ago. I brought this as a peace offering. Can I come in? You can talk from where you are. I'm listening. His practiced smile faltered slightly. He had expected me to melt at the gesture, to welcome him in and pour glasses of wine while he explained how I was overreacting, how we could work this out like reasonable adults. The fact that I remained standing in the doorway, unmoved by his charm offensive, seemed to genuinely surprise him. Look, I know the funeral was emotional for everyone. Grief makes people say things they don't mean. Emma feels terrible about what happened at the cemetery, and she wants to make things right. But these investigations, these anonymous tips to her workplace and David's firm, they're causing real damage to innocent people. Innocent people? I leaned against the doorframe, studying the man I had once loved with every fiber of my being. Tell me, Marcus, how exactly are Emma and David innocent in this situation? They're young, they're trying to build their careers, support their family. Everyone makes mistakes when they're under pressure. You, of all people, should understand that. The condescension in his tone was breathtaking. Even now, even after everything that had happened, he still saw me as the understanding ex-wife who would absorb any amount of disrespect to keep the peace. The woman who had signed those divorce papers without fighting for what I deserved, who had stepped aside gracefully when he wanted to marry Sophia, who had never demanded accountability for the years of lies and manipulation. I understand pressure very well, Marcus. I understand what it's like to work full-time while raising a child as a single mother. I understand what it's like to care for a dying parent while everyone else in the family finds excuses to be elsewhere. I understand what it's like to sacrifice your own needs repeatedly for people who never seem to appreciate the sacrifice. You're angry about the grandmother thing. I get it. But Sophia never meant to replace you. She's just good with kids, and she has more time to spend with them. It's not personal. Everything about this is personal, Marcus. Your wife has systematically positioned herself as the superior grandmother while I was distracted by my mother's illness. Emma has excluded me from family events for months while building a relationship between my grandchildren and a woman who has known them for only 5 years. And now, at my mother's funeral, I'm told that I'm being replaced entirely. How is any of that not personal? Marcus shifted uncomfortably, the wine bottle dangling forgotten at his side. Maybe we could all sit down together, talk this through, like adults. Sophia's willing to have that conversation. She respects you, Rebecca. She's never wanted to cause problems between you and the kids. The suggestion that Sophia respected me was so absurd that I almost laughed. This was the woman who had never once asked about my mother's condition during her 2-year illness, who posted family photos that deliberately excluded me, who had allowed Emma to call her mom in front of my grandchildren. Respect was the last thing she had shown me. Where is Sophia tonight, Marcus? Why isn't she here with you, eager to have this respectful conversation? She's at home with the boys. They have school tomorrow, and she wanted to make sure they got to bed on time. Of course she did. Sophia was always the responsible one, the one with proper priorities and excellent time management. Meanwhile, I was the unstable ex-wife making trouble over imagined slights, the bitter woman who couldn't accept that life had moved on without her. Tell me something, Marcus. During the 2 years I was caring for my mother, how many times did you call to check on me? How many times did you offer to help with her care, to give me a break, to contribute to the enormous medical expenses I was managing alone? He looked genuinely puzzled by the question, as if the idea of checking on my well-being had never occurred to him. You seem to have everything under control. You never asked for help. I shouldn't have had to ask. She was Emma's grandmother, too. She was your former mother-in-law, a woman who welcomed you into our family for 25 years, who babysat Emma when we needed date nights, who came to every one of Emma's school programs and graduations. But when she needed care, I was suddenly the only one responsible for her well-being. That's not fair. We all cared about Helen, but you're her daughter. You're the one with the medical background from your nursing courses in college. It made sense for you to take the lead. The, revisionist history was stunning. I had taken 2 pre-nursing courses 25 years ago before switching to marketing. Hardly a medical background that qualified me to manage Alzheimer's care. But it was convenient for everyone to believe that I was somehow uniquely suited for the grinding, thankless work of caregiving, that my sacrifice was natural rather than heroic. I took the lead because no one else volunteered, Marcus. I sacrificed my career, my financial security, my social life, and my relationship with my daughter because someone had to step up. And instead of being grateful for that sacrifice, Emma used my absence as an opportunity to replace me entirely. She didn't replace you. She just formed a closer relationship with Sophia during a difficult time. That's natural when people are going through stress. Is it natural to lie on volunteer applications? Is it natural for David to use insider information from Emma's medical contacts to make investment decisions? Because those are the kinds of relationships Emma has been forming while I was busy being the responsible daughter. Marcus's face went pale. What are you talking about? What insider information? Emma has access to pharmaceutical trial results through her position at the hospital. David has been making very profitable stock trades based on information that isn't public yet. It's a clever system, really. Emma shares what she learns about drug trials and FDA approvals. David makes strategic investments, and they split the profits. Very lucrative, and nearly impossible to trace unless someone knows exactly what to look for. This wasn't entirely true, but it was based on enough real information to be believable. David had indeed made several unusually successful pharmaceutical investments over the past year, and Emma did have access to early information about clinical trials through her hospital connections. Whether they were actually trading on insider information was unclear, but the appearance of impropriety was damaging enough. You're accusing them of securities fraud. That's a serious crime, Rebecca. If you're wrong about this, you could face defamation charges. If I'm right, they could face federal charges. Either way, the investigation will be thorough and public. David's firm takes compliance very seriously, as does the SEC. Even if they're completely innocent, the scrutiny will be uncomfortable for everyone involved. Marcus set the wine bottle down on my porch railing with trembling hands. What do you want? What will it take to end this? I want my family back, Marcus. I want to be treated with the respect I've earned through 30 years of devoted motherhood. I want my grandchildren to know who their real grandmother is. And I want Emma to face consequences for her cruelty instead of being rewarded for it. Emma's willing to apologize. She knows she hurt your feelings and she wants to make amends. My feelings? Marcus, she didn't hurt my feelings. She attempted to erase me from my grandchildren's lives. She used my mother's funeral as the occasion to announce my replacement. This isn't about hurt feelings. This is about fundamental respect and basic human decency. What exactly do you want her to do? What would satisfy you? I had been thinking about this question for days, crafting terms that would test Emma's character while giving her a path to redemption. The conditions would be humiliating for her, but not impossible to meet if she truly wanted to repair our relationship. I want Emma to host a family dinner where she publicly acknowledges what she did wrong. I want her to apologize to me in front of you, Sophia, and the children. I want her to explain to Lily and Connor that I am their grandmother, that I've always been their grandmother, and that I will continue to be their grandmother regardless of what relationship they have with Sophia. That's reasonable. I'm sure she'd be willing to do that. I'm not finished. I want her to take the children to my mother's grave once a month for the next year. I want them to help maintain the headstone, plant flowers, learn about their great-grandmother's life. I want Emma to undo the damage she's done to their connection with our family history. Marcus nodded slowly. I think that's something she could agree to. And I want her to contribute to a scholarship fund I'm establishing in my mother's name. A significant contribution, not a token gesture. Something that demonstrates her commitment to honoring the woman she neglected in life. How significant? Are we talking about? $50,000. Marcus's eyes widened. Rebecca, that's a lot of money. Emma and David are still paying off student loans. They have a mortgage, the kids' activities. They don't have that kind of cash lying around. Then they'll have to make sacrifices, won't they? They'll have to prioritize something other than their own comfort and convenience, just like I did for 2 years while caring for my mother. This is starting to sound like extortion. This is starting to sound like accountability. For 30 years, I've been the one making sacrifices, absorbing costs, managing problems while everyone else lived their lives without consequences. Emma wants to repair our relationship? She needs to demonstrate that repair with actions, not just words. And if she refuses? Then the investigations continue. The volunteer board at Lily's school will learn about Emma's fabricated credentials. David's compliance department will receive detailed documentation of his suspicious trading patterns. And I'll make sure that everyone in our extended family understands exactly what kind of daughter Emma has been to me, especially during my mother's final years. Marcus stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. The Rebecca he remembered was the woman who had signed those divorce papers without fighting, who had stepped aside gracefully when he wanted to remarry, who had never demanded anything from anyone. This new version of me, the one who was willing to use knowledge as a weapon and demand concrete amends, was someone he didn't recognize. This isn't who you are, Rebecca. This vindictive person, this angry woman threatening her own family. This isn't the woman I married, the mother who raised Emma. You're absolutely right. The woman you married was a doormat who absorbed everyone else's selfishness without complaint. The mother who raised Emma was so focused on being understanding and forgiving that she never taught her daughter that actions have consequences. Those women are gone, Marcus. They died at my mother's funeral when Emma looked me in the eye and declared that another woman was now the real grandmother. Emma was emotional. She was grieving too. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. She meant exactly what she said. She's been planning this replacement for months, maybe years. The funeral was just when she finally felt comfortable enough to announce it publicly. She thought I was too broken by grief, too weakened by exhaustion, too grateful for any scraps of attention to fight back. She was wrong. I picked up the wine bottle Marcus had brought and examined the label. It was indeed from our anniversary vintage, a bottle that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. The gesture was supposed to remind me of better times, to make me nostalgic for the woman I used to be when we were married. Instead, it reminded me of how much I had given up, how many compromises I had made, how often I had settled for less than I deserved. You can take this back to Sophia, I said, handing him the bottle. I'm sure she'll appreciate the thought. Tell Emma she has 48 hours to decide whether she wants to meet my terms or face the consequences of her choices. After that, the investigations proceed regardless of what she decides. Rebecca, please, think about what you're doing. Think about the damage this could cause to innocent people. I've thought about little else for the past week. I've thought about the damage that's already been caused by people who were supposed to love me but chose to betray me instead. I've thought about my mother dying while believing that she wasn't worthy of her granddaughter's time and attention. I've thought about my grandchildren being taught that their grandmother is disposable, replaceable, unimportant. The damage was done long before I decided to fight back. Marcus walked slowly back to his car, the wine bottle tucked under his arm like a failed peace offering. As he drove away, I felt a surge of something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, undiluted power. For the first time in decades, I was the one setting terms instead of accepting them. I was the one making demands instead of accommodating everyone else's needs. I was the one holding people accountable instead of making excuses for their behavior. The next morning brought a text from Emma. I need more time to think about your demands. This is all happening too fast. I responded immediately. You had 2 years to think about including me in family events while I cared for your grandmother. You had months to think about the impact of excluding me from the children's lives. You had plenty of time at the funeral to think before you announced my replacement. The deadline stands. She called within the hour, her voice raw with exhaustion. Mom, I can't raise $50,000 in 2 days. Even if I wanted to, it's impossible. David's already talking about taking out a second mortgage just to cover the legal fees if this SEC investigation goes forward. That's not my problem, Emma. You should have thought about the financial implications before you decided to betray me at my mother's funeral. I'm begging you, please, give me more time. Give me a chance to make this right without destroying everything David and I have worked for. You want more time? Fine. I'll give you 2 weeks to come up with the money. But the other conditions remain non-negotiable. The public apology, the monthly grave visits, the acknowledgement of my role as the children's grandmother. Those happen within 48 hours, or I release everything I have to every relevant authority. The public apology has to happen at a family dinner, in front of everyone, in front of Marcus, Sophia, and the children. I want them to hear, you acknowledge what you did wrong. I want them to understand that there are consequences for treating people with cruelty and disrespect. Sophia will never agree to come to a dinner like that. She'll know it's designed to humiliate her too. Then you'll have to convince her. You'll have to explain that her position as the preferred grandmother was built on lies and manipulation, and that the truth is finally coming out. You'll have to choose between protecting her comfort and repairing the damage you've done to our family. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I hate what you've become, Mom. I hate that you're willing to destroy people's lives over a misunderstanding. I hate what you became too, Emma. I hate that you're willing to throw away 30 years of my devoted motherhood for the convenience of having a stepmother who's more available and entertaining. I hate that you used my grief and exhaustion as an opportunity to replace me entirely. But unlike you, I'm not going to just accept the situation and hope it gets better. I'm going to fight for what I deserve. And what do you deserve, Mom? What's the end game here? Even if I do everything you're asking, even if I apologize and pay the money and take the kids to the cemetery, what then? Do we just pretend this never happened? Do we go back to being a happy family? We go forward with a new understanding. We go forward with the knowledge that I'm not someone who can be discarded without consequences. She would want you to know that family means taking care of each other, especially when it's difficult. Lily threw her arms around me, the silver locket clutched tightly in her small hand. I love you, Grandma Becky. I'm sorry, Great-Grandma. Helen died. I love you too, sweetheart. And I'm going to make sure you know all about the woman she was, all the wonderful stories from when your mommy was little. As I hugged my grandchildren, I caught Emma's eye over their heads. She was crying again, but these tears looked different. Not the manipulative tears of someone trying to avoid consequences, but the genuine grief of a woman who was finally understanding the full impact of her choices. The transformation wasn't complete yet. There would be more difficult conversations, more boundaries to establish, more work to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But something fundamental had shifted in that living room. The old dynamic, where I absorbed everyone else's selfishness without complaint, was finally broken. In its place was a new understanding that love requires respect, that family loyalty must flow in both directions, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept unacceptable behavior. As I prepared to leave that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had fought for what mattered and won. Not through manipulation or cruelty, but through the simple act of refusing to be erased, of demanding the respect I had, earned through decades of devoted love. The woman who had stood silent at her mother's grave while being replaced by her stepmother was gone. In her place stood Rebecca Hayes, a woman who finally understood her own worth and was willing to fight to protect it. And that transformation, born from grief and betrayal, had taught me the most important lesson of my 52 years. That sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're truly worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Rebecca, I never asked to replace you. I've only tried to be supportive of the children when they needed extra attention. You've systematically positioned yourself as the superior grandmother for years, Sophia. You've encouraged Emma to exclude me from family events. You've allowed my grandchildren to call you grandma while barely acknowledging my existence. And you've used my mother's illness as an opportunity to cement your position as the preferred family matriarch. That's not what happened, Marcus interjected. Sophia has always respected your role as the children's grandmother. She's never tried to replace you. I opened the manila folder I had brought and pulled out a stack of printed screenshots. These are social media posts from the past 18 months. Family gatherings, birthday parties, school events, holiday celebrations. Sophia appears in every single photo as the grandmother figure, while I'm completely absent. Not because I was invited and chose not to come, but because I wasn't invited at all. I spread the photos across Emma's coffee table like evidence in a courtroom. The visual impact was undeniable. Image after image of Sophia in the grandmother role, surrounded by happy family members, positioned as the center of attention and affection. Marcus and Emma examined the photos with growing discomfort, seeing their deliberate exclusion of me documented in stark detail. We didn't invite you because we knew you were overwhelmed with Grandma Helen's care, Emma said weakly. We didn't want to add to your stress. You didn't invite me because my grief and exhaustion were inconvenient for your perfect family gatherings. You didn't invite me because Sophia was more fun to be around, more available, more willing to pretend that everything was wonderful while I was dealing with the messy reality of watching my mother die. Sophia finally spoke up, her voice sharp, with defensive anger. I've never said anything negative about you, Rebecca. I've never tried to turn the children against you. I've only tried to be present and supportive when they needed someone. You've been present and supportive while I was absent doing the hard work of family responsibility. You've allowed Emma to replace me with you while I was sacrificing my career, my financial security, and my social life to care for her grandmother. You've benefited from my absence while contributing nothing to the actual work of loving this family. That's not fair, Marcus said. Sophia has been wonderful with the children. She's contributed a great deal to this family's happiness. By replacing me, Marcus. By stepping into the role I earned through 30 years of devoted motherhood. By allowing Emma to treat me as disposable while she positioned herself as indispensable. The room fell silent. David could be heard in the kitchen, quietly explaining to the children that the grown-ups needed to finish their conversation. His voice was gentle, reassuring, the tone of a man trying to shield innocent children from adult conflict that would reshape their understanding of family dynamics. Emma took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said at the funeral. I'm sorry for excluding you from family events. I'm sorry for not being more supportive during Grandma Helen's illness. I know I hurt you, and I know I made mistakes. You're sorry because you're facing consequences, Emma. You're sorry because your lies have been exposed, and your career is in jeopardy. You're not sorry because you recognize the cruelty of what you did to me. That's not true. I am sorry for hurting you. I know what I said at the cemetery was wrong. Then explain to me why you said it. Explain to me how you justified announcing my replacement at my mother's funeral. Emma's composure finally cracked completely. Tears began streaming down her face as she struggled to find words that would make sense of her actions. I was angry, Mom. I was angry that you weren't available when I needed you. I was angry that you chose Grandma Helen over me and the kids. I was angry that I had to turn to Sophia for the support I should have been getting from my own mother. So you decided to punish me by taking away my grandchildren. I didn't think of it as punishment. I thought of it as giving them stability. Sophia was there. She was available. She could be the grandmother they needed while you were dealing with your own problems. The honesty was brutal, but it was also revealing. Emma had genuinely convinced herself that she was acting in the children's best interests, that replacing me with Sophia was a practical solution rather than a cruel betrayal. She had rationalized her actions so thoroughly that she had lost sight of the fundamental cruelty of what she was doing. Emma, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I want you to imagine that in 20 years, when you're my age, Lily decides that David's mother is a better grandmother to her children than you are. I want you to imagine Lily standing at your mother's funeral and announcing that someone else will be taking your place as the real grandmother. I want you to imagine how that would feel. The color drained from Emma's face as the scenario sank in. For the first time, she was being forced to consider the emotional impact of her actions from my perspective, to understand the depth of the wound she had inflicted. I never thought of it that way, she whispered. You never thought of it at all. You thought about what was convenient for you, what made your life easier, what allowed you to avoid the complicated emotions of having a grieving, stressed mother. You didn't think about what it would do to me, what it would teach your children about family loyalty, what it would mean for the future of our relationship. Sophia stood up abruptly, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. I've done nothing wrong. I've only tried to be a good stepmother and grandmother. If that threatens you, Rebecca, that's your problem, not mine. Sit down, Sophia. My voice was calm, but implacable. You're not leaving until this conversation is finished. You can't tell me what to do. I'm not part of your family drama with Emma. You made yourself part of it when you allowed my grandchildren to call you grandma. You made yourself part of it when you participated in excluding me from family events. You made yourself part of it when you positioned yourself as my replacement instead of my complement. You don't get to play innocent now that the consequences are becoming uncomfortable. Marcus took Sophia's hand and gently guided her back to her seat. He understood, even if she didn't, that this confrontation was inevitable and necessary. The family dynamic that had developed over the past 2 years was unsustainable, built on lies and manipulation that were finally being exposed. What do you want from us, Rebecca? Marcus asked quietly. What would it take to resolve this situation? I pulled out a sheet of paper from my folder and handed it to Emma. These are my terms. Emma will make a public acknowledgement of what she did wrong, apologizing to me in front of everyone here and committing to treating me with respect going forward. She will contribute $50,000 to a scholarship fund in my mother's name. She will take Lily and Connor to visit their great-grandmother's grave once a month for the next year, helping them understand their family history and the importance of honoring their elders. Emma read the terms with shaking hands, her face growing paler with each line. Mom, I can't raise $50,000. David and I don't have that kind of money available. Then you'll have to make sacrifices, won't you? You'll have to sell something, take out a loan, ask for help from family members. You'll have to prioritize this obligation over your comfort and convenience, just like I prioritized your grandmother's care over my own needs. And if I refuse? Then the investigations continue. The SEC inquiry into David's trading patterns proceeds. The volunteer board at Lily's school learns about your falsified credentials. Your employer's ethics committee receives documentation of your misuse of confidential medical information. And everyone in our extended family learns exactly what kind of daughter you've been to me, especially during the hardest period of my life. The silence in the room was complete. Even the sounds from the kitchen had stopped, as if David and the children were holding their breath. waiting to see how this confrontation would resolve itself. Finally, Emma looked up from the paper. "I'll do it. I'll agree to your terms." "All of them?" "All of them." I reached into the gift bag I had brought and pulled out 2 small wrapped packages. "Lily, Connor, can you come in here, please?" The children entered the living room cautiously, sensing the weight of what had just transpired. I knelt down to their level and handed each of them a package. "These are from your great-grandma Helen. She wanted you to have them, to remember her by." Lily unwrapped hers first, revealing a delicate silver locket that had belonged to my mother. Inside was a tiny photo of Helen holding baby Emma, a picture that captured the love and devotion that had characterized my mother's approach to family. Connor's gift was my father's pocket watch, the one he had carried in Vietnam and passed down to me before his death. It was engraved with the words, "Time is precious. Use it wisely." "Your great-grandmother loved you very much," I told them. "She talked about you all the time, worried about you when you were sick, celebrated your achievements even when she couldn't remember your names clearly. We go forward with respect for the sacrifices I've made and the love I've shown, even when it wasn't convenient or profitable. We go forward with the truth. The truth is that you're scaring me, Mom. This isn't love. This isn't family. This is revenge, pure and simple. This is justice, Emma. Justice for 30 years of being taken for granted. Justice for 2 years of being excluded while I cared for your grandmother. Justice for being erased from my grandchildren's lives at the worst moment of my own life. If that looks like revenge to you, maybe you should examine why you're so afraid of being held accountable for your actions." After ending the call, I sat in Mom's kitchen and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I was doing. I was systematically dismantling my daughter's life, using her secrets against her, forcing her to choose between her pride and her financial security. A year ago, even a month ago, such actions would have been unthinkable. The old Rebecca would have absorbed the hurt, made excuses for Emma's behavior, and gradually accepted her diminished role in the family. But that Rebecca had died at the funeral, buried alongside the mother who had raised her to be endlessly accommodating. In her place stood a woman who finally understood that love without boundaries wasn't love at all, but a form of enabling that allowed cruel behavior to flourish unchecked. The new Rebecca understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to hold them accountable for their actions, even when it's painful for everyone involved. The transformation wasn't complete yet. There were still battles to be fought, still choices to be made about how far I was willing to go to reclaim my rightful place in my family. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was fighting for something that mattered, something that was worth the cost. I was fighting for my own dignity, my own worth, my own right to be treated with respect by the people I had devoted my life to loving, and I was going to win. The dinner happened on a Thursday evening in November, exactly 47 hours after my ultimatum expired. Emma had called me that morning, her voice hollow with defeat, to confirm that everyone would be there at 6:00. Marcus and Sophia had agreed to come, though Emma warned me that Sophia was not happy about being put in this position. The children would be present too, though Emma had asked if they could be sent to watch movies after the adults talked. I had refused. They needed to witness this conversation, needed to understand the adult consequences of treating family members as disposable. I arrived at Emma's house carrying a manila folder thick with documents and a small gift bag containing something special for each of my grandchildren. The house looked exactly the same as always, perfectly maintained suburban comfort with David's BMW in the driveway and Emma's minivan parked beside it. But everything felt different now. I was no longer the grateful grandmother hoping for scraps of attention. I was a woman who had finally learned to value herself, who had discovered that respect could be demanded rather than simply hoped for. Emma answered the door wearing a black dress that made her look like she was attending another funeral. Her face was drawn, her usual makeup barely concealing the dark circles under her eyes. She looked like someone who hadn't slept well in days, which was probably accurate given the pressure she'd been under to arrange this gathering and figure out how to finance the scholarship contribution I'd demanded. "Hello, Emma. Thank you for hosting tonight." My voice was calm, pleasant, the tone of someone arriving for a normal family dinner rather than a reckoning that would reshape our relationships forever. "Mom, before everyone gets here, I need you to know that this is incredibly difficult for all of us. Sophia almost didn't come. She feels like she's being blamed for something she didn't do. Sophia made choices, just like everyone else. Now she gets to live with the consequences of those choices. That's how adult relationships work." Emma led me into the living room where David sat with Lily and Connor, helping them with homework at the coffee table. David looked up when I entered, his expression carefully neutral. He had always been politically minded, skilled at reading situations and positioning himself advantageously. Tonight, he seemed to be calculating which side of this family conflict would be safer to support. "Hi, Rebecca. How are you holding up?" His concern sounded genuine, though I suspected it was more about protecting his own interests than actual worry about my well-being. "I'm doing very well, David. Better than I have in years, actually. How are things at the firm?" A flash of anxiety crossed his face before he could control it. "Busy as always. End-of-year reporting. You know how it is." Well, I did know how it was. I also knew that his compliance department had been asking very specific questions about his recent investment patterns, questions that had made his colleagues curious about his decision-making process. Even if my accusations about insider trading were ultimately unsubstantiated, the scrutiny was already damaging his reputation and creating stress throughout his professional network. Lily looked up from her math homework and smiled at me, the sweet, uncomplicated affection of a 9-year-old who hadn't yet learned to navigate adult politics. "Grandma Becky, Mommy said you brought us presents." "I did, sweetheart. But first, we're going to have dinner and some grown-up conversation. Then I'll show you what I brought." Connor, always more reserved than his sister, nodded solemnly. At 7, he was old enough to sense the tension in the room, but young enough to trust that the adults would handle whatever was wrong. I felt a pang of regret that he would have to witness what was about to unfold, but Emma had made this choice when she decided to use my grandchildren as pawns in her power game with Sophia. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. Emma went to answer it, and I could hear Marcus's voice in the foyer, followed by Sophia's higher, more carefully modulated tone. They were discussing the weather, the traffic, anything except the real reason they were here. When they entered the living room, the atmosphere immediately became more charged. Marcus wore his lawyer uniform, expensive suit, confident posture, the expression of a man who believed he could negotiate his way through any difficulty. Sophia had chosen her outfit carefully, too. A cream-colored sweater set that made her look both elegant and vulnerable, paired with minimal jewelry and understated makeup. She was presenting herself as the wronged party here, the innocent woman, being unfairly attacked by her husband's bitter ex-wife. "Rebecca," Marcus nodded formally. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for agreeing to be here, Marcus. I know this isn't easy for anyone." Sophia remained silent, but her body language spoke volumes. She stood close to Marcus, her hand resting possessively on his arm, her chin tilted slightly upward in the defiant posture of someone who refused to be intimidated. She looked like a woman who had never faced real consequences for her actions, who expected to charm or manipulate her way out of uncomfortable situations. "Why don't we sit down for dinner?" Emma suggested, her voice bright with false cheer. "I made pot roast, everyone's favorite." Dinner was a surreal experience, like attending a wake where the deceased person was sitting at the table watching everyone pretend to mourn. The children chattered about school and friends, while the adults maintained stilted conversation about safe topics: the weather, holiday plans, local news. Sophia complimented Emma on the meal and asked David about his work, playing the role of the caring family member who was genuinely interested in everyone's lives. I watched her performance with detached fascination. This was how she had inserted herself into my family's dynamic, by being consistently pleasant, available, and interested. She remembered birthdays, offered to babysit, showed up to school events with camera and enthusiasm. She had been everything I couldn't be while I was consumed with caregiving responsibilities, and she had used my absence strategically to position herself as the better alternative. "Grandma Sophia, are you coming to my piano recital next week?" Lily asked, her face bright with anticipation. "Of course, sweetheart. I wouldn't miss it. I've already marked it on my calendar." The casual use of Grandma Sophia in my presence was like a slap across the face, a reminder of how thoroughly I had been replaced in my grandchildren's lives. But instead of the old familiar ache, I felt only cold determination. This conversation was about to end that particular fiction permanently. After dinner, Emma sent the children to the kitchen to help David clean up, though I suspected the real purpose was to give us privacy for the conversation she was dreading. The four adults settled in the living room, the same seating arrangement. We might have used for a pleasant social visit if the circumstances had been completely different. Emma cleared her throat nervously. "Mom, you asked us all to be here tonight because you wanted to discuss what happened at Grandma Helen's funeral. I think we all understand that feelings were hurt, and we want to make things right." Feelings were hurt? The understatement was so absurd that I almost smiled. "Emma, you stood at your grandmother's grave and announced that another woman would be taking my place as your children's grandmother. That wasn't about hurt feelings. That was about fundamental disrespect and cruelty." Sophia shifted in her seat, her composure finally showing cracks.